everybody. Mark from Maple Capital Partners here, and today I'm here to talk with you all about choosing the right property managing partner for your property. So I want to first start off by saying that the property manager is your eyes and ears on the property on a day-to-day basis. They're really an extension of your team. And of course, your asset manager is going to be visiting the property and working with the PM in order to execute on the business plan. But ultimately, the responsibility of executing on that vision, on that business plan, and operating the property is going to be the property manager themselves. So as such, the importance of the property manager to your investment in real estate, it cannot be overstated. They are so important to the outcome of any given real estate investment. So you could take it from us because of the fact that we worked with over 10 property managers to date through our investing careers, and we've been able to pick up a ton through that process as far as what makes a great property manager and how to ensure that you're only working with rock stars, that is the best, most qualified property management team in your investment. So I'm going to go through a few different areas, a few different questions that I would ask any PM before I decide who to move forward with on an investment. Hopefully, by talking through some of these questions, you're able to learn a little bit more about how to vet a property manager and ultimately choose the right partner for you on these deals. So first off, when you're vetting a property manager, you want to ask a bunch of questions regarding their background, their track record, and what qualifications they have. Things like, how long have you been in business? What's the story of the company? What areas do you cover geographically? If there's, you're looking at a market that may be outside of the current market of the property manager, that's definitely going to be a detractor from working with that property manager. As we all know, real estate is super local, so you want to have a property manager that's super aware of all the different dynamics in a given market. How many properties or units are you currently managing? What types of properties are they? Are they B, C class? Are they Section 8? What class of property and tenant base are they managing? If they're used to dealing with Class A, new builds in really high income areas, and the asset that you're looking at is a lower income area and a lower C class tenant base, then it may not be the right property manager for that tenant base. They just may not be equipped or have the processes in place to be able to deal with some of the demands of managing an asset with that tenant quality. You also want to ask questions like, what certifications do they have? Do they belong to any property management organizations? For example, there's NARPM, that's the Residential Management Professional Certification, RMP. They could have the IREM, Certified Property Manager, or CPM designation. They could be NAA Certified Apartment Manager. That's a CAM designation. So you really want to ask about what certifications or credentials they have to be able to show that they are professional. What type of training do they offer their employees? So not only is it important for the owner of the company to be well-versed in everything that it takes to run a property, but also somebody that's ensuring that their employees are investing in their own education and they're offering training to continually level up their own property management skills. So that's going to be really, really important. I would ask them, what training programs do you have in place currently? What are some of the courses or tracks that you have for your property managers? How do they rise through the ranks in your company? Things like that are really going to show you what type of development they have for their property managers. So they're not just hiring anybody off the street and, entrusting them with your potentially multi-million-dollar asset. What are your office hours, as well as do you have after-hour call centers in place? Tenants will call at any given time of day or night, depending on the situation. If there's an emergency, you want to know that there's going to be somebody on the other end of the line to be able to resolve that issue. Or if it's not an emergency, to at least note that issue so that during work hours for the company, that they'll be able to pass that information along. Things like outsourced VAs, off-hour workers that are maybe remote, things like that are all things you want to hear from a professional property manager so that tenant requests and calls after hours don't go unanswered. Technology, this is going to be a huge one. You want to know the property manager is tech-focused. What PM software do they use? What does it allow them to do? How do they plan on using technology moving forward? Increasingly, industries are being disrupted by technology, and property management is no different. Real estate is increasingly becoming tech reliant in terms of software and incorporating not only software for property management, but also artificial intelligence. You'd be surprised what's going on out there in terms of development on a lot of different forward-thinking assets and forward-thinking real estate companies. They're really leveraging technology to be able to give them a leg up over the competition. So you want to know that your property manager is doing the same. Whether that means contactless showings, we saw a rise of that during COVID, or it could mean things like smart tech within the unit, so that tenants have complete control over the thermostat remotely, or they have keyless entry, for example. So ask them what's going on as far as technology. How do they plan on incorporating technology in their business going forward? Also, you can ask them for sample documents that they use, things like leases, the property management agreement that they're going to sign with you. You want to have that read through and also have that reviewed by your own attorney that's versed in local and state laws. So make sure that you get a copy of that management agreement before you sign any paperwork with them, so you can understand exactly what you're signing up for. A move in and move out condition report, that's going to be super important. So seeing what that looks like. Property management, the owner financial reporting. So what types of reporting do they offer on the property and on the financial performance of the property? Maybe even ask them to see what their platform looks like from the owner perspective. Do they provide that to owners? We know many property managers that will provide access to the property management software to the owners directly, so they can pull down in real time any reports that they need or wish to view. Whereas other property managers much more prefer to just provide those reports on an as-needed or automated basis. So knowing what they're working with as far as software, a few of the brands that we've worked with include the likes of Buildium, Appfolio, Yardi. There are a ton of them out there, but those are some of the more used on an institutional level as far as property management goes. Rental applications, you definitely want to read through those and see what your prospective tenants will be ultimately signing, and what types of responsibilities you have as a landlord, and what are some of the clauses that are promised to tenants in that rental agreement. I would also have that reviewed by your local attorney, who's going to be more familiar with some of the real estate laws in that state. How are potential tenants screened? You want to ask them about their processes. What goes into the screening? Do they do any kind of background checks, eviction history, credit checks, criminal history? You really want to understand what's the process for somebody that sees one of your online listings, goes to schedule a tour, fills out an application, and ultimately how that gets vetted and then them eventually moved in. Also, fee structure. What's included in that fee structure? So, while everybody talks about management fees, that's only one portion of what the property manager ultimately makes. They could have any number of other fees that are tied into what you pay for their service on your property. Things like move-in fees or administrative fees. If they're overseeing CapEx, there may be a construction management fee there. So you really want to understand the entire cost of their property management services. Now, obviously, pay for what you get. So everything has a cost. You definitely don't want to preclude them from making a living in doing what they're doing. And we've seen a ton of cases where the low-cost provider in property management is also offering the lowest quality service. So the fee on its own is not going to be a determining factor. It's just going to be one of many things that's going to help you make a decision as to whether or not that's the right property manager. The main thing to keep in mind is if they are too high or way too low, meaning they're outside of the range of many of the competition, then that's going to be kind of a red flag for you. If they're charging way too much, then there may be a more competitive cost structure out there for similar service. If they're charging way too little, then you have to ask yourself, well, what service are they actually really trying to provide here? How are unit repairs charged to the owner? Is there a markup there for things like painting, plumbing, general maintenance work? That's another way that you can get charged outside the property management fee that ultimately impacts your financials. Then you want to ask a ton of questions about their processes. We already touched about the tenant vetting and the tenant screening process, but also ask about their unit turn process. If they're overseeing the unit turns, the unit renovations, how are they doing that? When are they starting advertising? Who does the painting and interior general repairs, as well as any kind of renovation that's needed there? Do they have that in-house or is that outsourced? How long does it typically take for them to turn a unit? How about just simple rent renewals? How are they going about planning those rent renewals? When are they sending out the renewals to tenants whose leases are expiring? And what is their process for going about that? How do you advertise your rental? So how are you marketing? What does your leasing funnel look like? What are you listing these units on as far as the online platforms? A lot of PM software has a service where they syndicate out these listings to a number of different online platforms, apartments.com, Trulia, Zillow, Redfin, all these different leasing marketing type platforms. And you want to know what those are and how they go about listing those. Also, do they have a tenant referral policy? So there's going to be a really high chance of good word of mouth bringing in tenants versus just marketing out to the public. When you have a tenant make a referral to one of their friends or family members, there's a much higher likelihood than somebody just applying off of the street. But furthermore, you're also creating more stickiness in your community, because when that person moves in, now they become a part of the community, and it's less likely that they'll move because they've got friends or family member in the property itself. Do you perform tenant surveys? Is there any kind of feedback you're getting from current tenants as to how the property is being managed, and are their expectations being met at the property? This is going to be super important, because you're not going to get this feedback from most tenants unless you ask for it. And the only way that you're going to get that feedback really is by seeing folks leave, and that's ultimately going to be the last line that they're going to basically cross in order for you to get some kind of feedback. And by that time, it's way too late for you to make any kind of improvements to their situation. So you want to ask proactively, maybe offering tenant surveys, something we've done in the past, in exchange for having them entered into some kind of a raffle, or the potential to get some kind of discount to their rent if they do provide feedback on a given survey. How is rent collected? So do you accept cash? That's going to be a really big red flag for any property manager. You really don't want them to be accepting cash, because that is such a difficult situation to prove. If, God forbid, a tenant says in court that they paid and you said that they didn't pay, or your property manager says they didn't pay, it's very difficult to prove with cash that in fact they did or did not pay. So I would say making sure that they're collecting their rent payments through software. Now, you also want to ask them, do you have a solution in place for tenants who aren't as tech savvy? Because there are going to be some folks that, they're just maybe old timers or just used to doing things on a cash basis, maybe with prior ownership, and they're not going to want to pay through a platform. So in that case, you have to ensure that your property manager is providing them a way to pay without having access to a computer. So things like going to Walmart or 7-Eleven or any of those, and having a process to be able to pay at some of those big brand retailers is key. And I know a lot of rent payment solutions have that offering as part of it. So asking them those types of questions to ensure that you're offering something for everybody at your complex, because they're not all going to be tech savvy folks that you're renting to. Also, who handles maintenance work? So is that done in-house or is that outsourced? Do you employ an on-site handy person, or is that all kind of third party? That's going to be a big one, because if it's all third party, number one, there's going to be, you're going to be paying higher for that. And also, you're on their schedule. So if you have, one or two handymen that you always go to for work, chances are that, on a given day, they may be on another job and not able to get to your property. So no matter how good of a relationship you have, third party is always going to be a little bit less dependable than if you have maintenance or handymen on payroll, or if the property manager does, I should say. How are work orders submitted by the tenant, and what's the process there? Do you document the maintenance requests? And if so, where can you see that as the owner? Do they inspect the work orders once they're completed to make sure that they're up to their satisfaction? What's their system basically of checks and balances? What you don't want is, work orders to be completed. And we've seen this in the past where work orders are completed, but then, the tenant will complain, a few days later that, hey, this was not done or was not done to their satisfaction. And the same problem is persisting. And that's, makes for a really difficult situation with the tenant and does not leave them with a really good client experience there. So really just want to know what their work order and maintenance request process really looks like at the end of the day. Now, what type of preventative measures are they taking as far as damage to the units, as well as making sure that the units are upkept? It's one thing to treat the issues after they arise, but it's a whole nother thing to get ahead of those issues so that hopefully you can prevent some of those issues from ever occurring. Are there regular walkthroughs that they provide for the units? So we have on a biannual basis, we have our PM that actually goes through and inspects all units, and tenants are aware of that. They're notified well in advance, and they go through and they look for any issues that may be going on inside the unit, but may be unreported by the tenant. Things like a running toilet, or sink that's got a slow leak. Something like that may not catch the attention of the tenant themselves, but is going to ultimately have an impact and is ultimately going to bear on you in the long term. So the other thing that they can look at when they're in there is what's the general condition of the unit in terms of how the tenant keeps it up. If the tenant is causing damage to the interior of the unit and not keeping it up, and there's dog doo-doo everywhere, and there are a bunch of people living there that aren't on a lease, then that may be a problem. That may be grounds for you to issue them a lease violation. You're not there to act like a police officer or anything like that, or be a hall monitor in a sense, but you want to make sure that whoever's living there is holding up their end of the bargain. They do sign lease contracts, which do stipulate in many cases that they have to keep the unit in good, clean condition. So you want to make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain, and that's nobody is in the unit that's not supposed to be in the unit and living there, because you could run into issues liability-wise if that becomes the case. The next thing that we would ask is, what happens when someone doesn't pay? What does that process look like? Are they immediately sent an eviction letter? How does the process look like from the PM standpoint? And what are the rules around that in this particular state? If the state mandates that you give them a 7-day notice and then issue an eviction letter, then you want to know that your property manager is complying with that regulation. Also, let's say that a tenant has said that they're going to move out. So this relates to the renewal process, and it's just a matter of a month or so that they're going to move out in. What is the PM's process as far as listing the unit for rent? How does that process for finding a new tenant work when the old one is still occupying the unit? You want to know that if they get a notice from a tenant that they're going to be vacating, that as soon as they get that, they've got their handyman or a renovation team in place and ready to go. So as soon as that tenant moves out, they're going in there with their move out condition report. They're coming up with a scope of work to make the renovation. They're taking action on that scope of work and ultimately turning that unit. And while this is all going on, that you're marketing that unit. You don't want to start marketing that unit just when the work is done. You want to start ahead of that time, so that by the time that you're done with that unit and ready to show it, you've already got a pretty solid waiting list of tenants that are eager to come by and take a look. So you want to know that that is all in place, and that there is no friction or no inefficiency in their unit turn process, because in this business, time is money. And across a portfolio of hundreds of units, missing a week or 2 weeks on the turns can add up to some really substantial dollar amounts. Now, the last thing you want to really ask your property manager is about referrals and references. You want to rely on them to give you some references for others in the market and leverage that relationship that you have through the vetting process to learn about other people besides property managers that you could potentially add to your team. So you could very easily ask this property manager, hey, are you familiar with any rockstar brokers that you can make a referral to, make an introduction with in this market? A lot of times property managers, they deal with acquisitions and new properties, and they're seeing who are the ones who are transacting in a given market. And so they'll be super familiar with who are the brokers in that market that are movers and shakers and really doing a ton of deals. And there's nothing like a warm introduction. So getting them to make the referral to a broker that you may not have a relationship with is going to make a huge difference. Now, another thing you could ask them a referral for is another group of investors. So are there other investors in this market that you could provide me a reference towards, or perhaps a list of a few properties that you manage in this area that I could reach out to those owners on? So that can be a source of leads in that property. If these owners are looking to sell, or maybe now or down the road, you can build that relationship and put it out there that you're looking to be buying and aggressively growing in that market. And then also, it always benefits you in the long term to have local contacts who are investors. when you have questions or you have issues at your property, being able to rely on the experience and the expertise of others in that market that may have been through the very same things is going to be invaluable in terms of, helping you get around some of those obstacles and answer some of those questions. So you want to make sure that you're building relationships with other investors in the market, because whether it be brokers or property managers, attorneys, really anybody from that group of people on your team, they all have a vested interest in seeing more business come from you. So while they may have your best interest in mind, they're also operating from the motivation of wanting to see you acquire more properties, whereas the investor is going to be a lot more impartial, a lot more neutral. They're going to be coming to you with no hidden agenda as far as wanting you to act or not act on a given property or a given business plan. So you're going to get a lot more unbiased opinion on some of these situations that you run into. So you can really rely on that. And that's something that we pride ourselves on in the markets in which we operate. We have a pretty deep network of other investors, and we'll often rely on those investors for, maybe vetting some acquisitions that we're looking at, or getting over some issues that we're facing on a property, because again, there's strength in numbers. So we've been through a ton here in terms of how to vet a property manager. I want to just kind of conclude there. And in conclusion, I'll say that choosing the right property manager can make or break your business plan on a given property, and it can thus determine the outcome of your investment. Whether or not they're able to execute on your plan, that's going to be a strong determinant of how successful your project becomes. Now, while over the years we've worked with many different third-party property management companies of all shapes and sizes, one thing that we can say without a doubt is that the single most important member of your team is going to be your property manager. So that being the case, we strongly urge you to follow the common saying that you hear in business, and that's hire slow and fire fast. Do your due diligence, ask a lot of the questions that we went over during this session, and really vet the PM to see if they're fit for your project. Do they match your value system and your ethical compass? Do you foresee them as easy to work with? Do they have experience? Do they have professional systems and clearly documented processes in order to manage your property effectively? Those are going to be questions that you're trying to fundamentally answer as you do your PM vetting. And we hope that we've provided some of those questions during this session, and that as you go forward and as you ask some of these questions of your potential PM, that you document those answers so that you can always go back to, as you're going through your process of vetting different PMs, comparing different approaches one against another. So we hope that's helped. We urge you to reach out if you have any questions about vetting a property manager in your local market, or if you'd like a copy of our questionnaire, our PM questionnaire, which we're happy to send you. You feel free to reach out to myself or Gonzalo, that's Mark, M-A-R-C, or Gonzalo, G-O-N-Z-A-L-O, at investwithmaple.com. Either of those names at investwithmaple.com. Now, if you're not sure that you want to entrust the management of your asset to a third-party PM, we'll link to an article in the description of this video that'll help you understand the pros and cons of third-party versus self-management. Regardless, if you're in the process of vetting a PM for your property, feel free to reach out to us with any questions you might have, and we'll sign off as we always do at Maple Capital Partners. Be kind, be charitable, and invest wisely. Thanks, folks.